everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me are my fabulous co-hosts.
As always, it's me, Diana.
And never, it's me, Jackie. Just kidding. I'm here too. I'm always here.
Hey, so this is our podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic related to the field and discuss some relevant research articles. And if you are listening to this in the main feed, you'll say, yes, this seems like a normal episode, I guess. But if you're a Patreon subscriber, then you may not be listening to this with the audio podcast. You may actually be watching the video because this is a live episode.
Oh, you're here.
We're here. Jackie is off camera because our camera got too small and she wanted to move, so she had some space.
I'm here.
We've been recording a couple things today, so she wanted some space from us both. So she is here, though. You can hear her voice, though you may not see her
Here
head.
I am.
Her head.
My head is here.
Yeah.
And so is my body.
It's here.
Yeah, but if you're on Patreon, then you will hear Jackie's voice and see our faces, Diana and mine. If you are just listening in your podcast player, you're just going to hear our voices like normal, and not much will have changed. But we wanted you to know there is a distinction that is imperceptible from your iPhone speakers, I guess. So this topic was voted on by Patreon subscribers as well. We had a couple different options. As always, direct instruction was a choice, which no one ever votes for. Though it almost won this time, so I will keep at it. It'll eventually win when we run out of every other topic. But the winning topic was visual supports, which I think was Diana, that was your suggestion as to let's throw that in there and see if people want to hear us talk about visual supports. Please tell us why.
It turns out they did.
They did. Why was that?
Yeah.
Why was that your choice? What were you thinking there? What were you thinking there?
What was I thinking?
Because I want our audience to know the episode they're in for. Like, oh, what are you in for?
No, I really wanted to talk about this because I think that we potentially underutilize visual supports in our field, and they are things that we can easily utilize. They have high social validity. People like visual supports. I think that they can be quite useful for clients. And basically they don't hurt, right, to have included. And I feel like it's,
If
in
they
a
fall
way,
off the wall on you, they could hurt. If you framed your visual supports.
okay. And I feel like it's respectful, basically, right, to add in this as an additional piece of information that you could provide to someone. So I like it for those reasons. I also think that, and maybe we'll talk about this, maybe we won't, we all use visual...
Do you want to talk about it? Because we
I'm going to talk about it now.
Okay.
We all use visual supports all the time.
Oh, I could not do my entire life
Yes.
from the time I wake up until the time I go to bed without visual supports.
Exactly. And, we just had an episode not long ago where we talked about generalization. We talked about mediating generalization, right? And a huge piece of that is through visual supports and the stimulus control that visual supports can provide across situations. So sometimes with my students, I bring up the question for them of what does it mean to be, quote unquote, independent with a task, and how important is it that we require someone to be what we call, quote unquote, 100% independent with a task, when if you stop and think about your own life, I am not 100% independent at many tasks that I do, right? I use my phone to help me keep track of my own schedule. We have a big calendar on the wall that everyone in the family uses to remember what they're doing and when.
I think the last thing I remember doing on the calendar was April 2021, I believe.
Okay.
We might need to update that one.
Yeah, we might need to update it. But that
It explains why I haven't been going
for a
to any of my
while,
meetings.
okay, fine. But for a while, it was very useful. And then we talked about it also recently in our video modeling episode that we did recently, is that we use those types of visual supports and strategies all the time as well. You don't know how to do something, look it up on YouTube, right? Look up a recipe and use that. So all of these are embedded within our lives. And I think that when we, step back and think about from that perspective, there's nothing wrong with utilizing visual supports, and they can be a huge asset if we're trying to promote generalization and maintenance of tasks. They are naturally occurring, they're ubiquitous, right? And they can be quite helpful, at least in like the general sense. And then I guess we're going to talk more today about the very specific experimental sense from there. But
I also think that, my article really talks about how they promote independence.
yeah,
Right? Because the less prompting an educator or an outside person has to do,
right.
the more independent that person who is using the visual supports will be.
Yes.
Right? Which obviously can increase independence, can increase confidence, can increase, engagement of tasks. So I just think it's an excellent thing to always be putting in and not fading.
Exactly.
Right? Because you don't need to.
You don't need to fade it.
Right.
Yeah. So the challenge with prompting and prompt fading is at what point does the stimulus control switch from the prompt to the naturally occurring
Right.
environment? And when you are utilizing visual supports, that can be a much easier transition.
Because you never have to get rid of it. It can
Exactly.
just be with you.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
My very expensive planner testifies to that.
Yeah.
We see this a lot in schools too when we talk about universal design for learning and the idea of, there are a lot of things that if you say, you know what, everybody gets this,
Yeah.
then guess what? You've changed the definition of independent learning in a way that is realistic and is much more inclusive than, nope, you have to do it without any help whatsoever. Think about it though.
Right.
Like you said, Diana, YouTube videos, like how many people have probably had to fix something and they watched a video of someone doing it and they could pause and rewind the video and they did it. And most people wouldn't say, yeah, I guess I did change, the washer on my sink, but I'm dependent. I'm so dependent. They say, hooray, I did it. I changed my sink. I'm good at this now. Right? Maybe not good at this, but I'm capable of doing this. They don't think for a second, most folks, that, well, technically, if you want to think about it, you weren't independent at all in that. It was fully prompted. Nobody says that. They just think, hooray, I fixed my sink and I'm proud of myself for doing so. And everyone who uses visual supports in that way should be proud of themselves for doing so.
Absolutely. Because fixing a sink is hard work.
Well, all this thing, yeah. Washer's not so bad. It's doable. You need like a butter knife and it's, And anyway, that's what we're going to show you for the rest of this video is how to change your sink. So when looking into visual supports, the other problem with not a problem with visual supports, but a problem with talking about visual supports is there are so many examples of visual support. So when we were digging into this sort of broad category, because we like to do kind of broad category episodes if we've never talked about the topic specifically before, we realized a lot of what folks sort of, keyword as visual supports would include things like, video modeling could be a support, scripts could be a visual support, picture activity schedules could be a visual support. So many things we actually did episodes on as visual supports could be considered visual supports or are considered visual supports. So we thought we'd take a step back. So we have a couple articles across the different categories of visual support. So we thought, well, let's pick kind of, try to get like one from some of the key areas that most people are publishing visual supports articles on and try to find some areas that are interesting to give folks who are like, I use checklists or I have a to-do list or my students all use a to-do list or I use a planner myself, some new ideas of what could be used as a visual support. So hopefully this will spark your awareness of visual supports and move beyond sort of the basic types of visual supports or thinking of using visual supports in novel ways.
Yeah. And just to note here, we're not talking about AAC.
Nope.
No.
Right? So we're not talking about PEC's use and handing over, doing a picture exchange. Those incorporate visuals, but that's a communication method. And here we're talking about providing additional visual supports that would function as discriminative stimuli in the environment.
Yes. I think that's kind of the working definition of visual supports that we'll be using throughout the episode.
Boom, nailed it.
Yeah.
Boom.
All right, so Diana, tell us, what are the 4 articles that we will be discussing today?
Oh, goodness. I don't know why I was unprepared for that question, but I will tell you what they are.
We've got to read them. So, Patreon subscribers, you can watch us read the articles live.
Oh, stop it.
That would be hilarious.
That is like not into the bits. Like I like when we do these because there's like a jazzy energy, and I feel you are not interested in it today. I don't even need a visual support to signal that.
Okay, so there are 4 articles we're going to talk about today. One is this is our overview article, using visual supports with young children with autism spectrum disorder by Meaden, Ostrowski, Triplett, Mishna, and Fettig. That was published in Teaching Exceptional Children But what year, you ask?
2011.
2011, it turns out. Okay? Then we are going to discuss the effects of a picture activity schedule for students with intellectual disability to complete a sequence of tasks following verbal directions by Duttlinger, Ayers, Bevel, Davis, and Douglas. And that was published in Focus on Autism and Other Developmental Disabilities 2012. Then we have integrated visual supports in a school-based micro-enterprise for students with intellectual disabilities by Fields and Demchek, published in Career Development and Transition for Exceptional Individuals 2019.
Ooh.
And finally, visual supports to increase conversation engagement for preschoolers with autism spectrum disorder during mealtimes, an initial investigation by Bateman, Wilson, Gavreau, Matthews, Gukwa, Therian, Neville, and Mazurek, and that was published in the Journal of Early Intervention 2022.
Well, it was a journey.
You know,
It was a journey.
Every research article is really a journey.
They really are.
They're the ultimate
That's what we
fantasy story,
specialize
or
in
sci-fi
here.
story,
Yeah,
or nonfiction story. I guess would
probably
be.
a nonfiction.
Probably not. You're
Hopefully
right.
nonfiction.
Hopefully not. Well, let's hope it's not a fantasy
Okay.
story. All right. So, Meaden et al., again, is not a research article in the sense of the research articles we typically discuss, but really was a very nice overview of
It's a
sort of...
primer.
Yeah.
Really? People say that word?
No, it's
I
a
love it.
primer.
I don't know. Why it's a
priming
primer.
me.
Is that a New England thing?
I don't
No.
know. It's a wrong thing is what I say. And I'm from New England.
Okay.
So it's a primer of the different kinds of visual supports, the different modalities, as well as the different types of visual support categories that can be used, and some general rules to keep in mind with visual supports. So this article, as Diana started us off with, does point out that visual supports are ubiquitous. They are not just for special education. And I think if you took stock of how many visual supports you use in a day, you would realize that this is not a special education or an autism treatment topic. This is an everybody topic. However, we're mostly going to be focusing on its use in an educational treatment setting.
I like the everybody topic.
I like an everybody topic too, because it allows you to sort of think of yourself as not being anything different than other individuals.
We're all learning.
We're
Yep.
all
That's
learning.
the whole. That's what we're doing here.
Well, let's
right?
finish
It's
the episode, and
science
then
of
we'll
learning.
discuss if there was learning that went on. We hope so. That's the goal. Huh?
I've learned something.
Oh, that's good. I was joking, but no. I need a visual. So I'll hold up a sign
You
when
got
I'm
it.
You
telling a
want
joke.
applause? Laughter. Ha 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 ha.
That's very genuine. Thank you. All right. So when we think about visual supports, we can kind of break down the types of visual supports in terms of the representation of the visual itself. So this means visual supports could include things like real objects, as well as representations of those objects in the form of, say, photographs or line drawings. And when you get down to it, even things like words are going to function as visual supports in a way because they are representations of the actual objects. Now, there are pros and cons to using all four of these kind of modalities or representations in your visual supports. Real objects are more understood by everybody in the environment, so it can be very good for use with young children or children with more severe cognitive disabilities or who need a lot of repetition. It's relevant to put it in locations where it could be found in the environment, so it does help with replicability for the individual. However, the item is an item, which means it may be hard to move around to different places, and as children get older, is going to be more stigmatizing in uses of visual support. So typically with visual support, we're talking about things like photographs, which are much easier to generate, especially nowadays when you can take 1 billion photographs, from your phone. You can project them in all sorts of fun ways, especially in schools that have smart boards or other technologies. Line drawings can be very useful in terms of looking at things that are harder to photograph or that you cannot photograph. So BoardMaker would be a good example of a program that produces line drawings as visual supports. You could just draw a picture of something, so the bar to entry can be kind of low.
I like that.
However, again, the issue there, though, becomes like what you have may not be what folks are looking for, or they may not be representative of what is relevant to the individual in their own environment. So again, that context may make the line drawings a little less useful than, say, photographs in some cases. And then finally, finally, words are ideal. However, not everyone is able to decode those words or associate those words with the pictures or with the photographs. So I think a lot of times you will see most visual supports do have a word component tied into them, because the hope is that over time, perhaps those words would be used over just the pictures alone. However, there's certainly no reason you couldn't have both. I think we still have plenty. I mean, I was in the city with my son the other day, and what's the sign when I'm not supposed to walk? It isn't "don't walk" anymore. It's just the big flashing red hand, "Don't cross the street." And I didn't take offense at that. Why aren't both words and pictures there? I just recognize this is a symbol that means "don't walk." That's a visual support for me. Now, when you take these different representations of visuals, you can also then decide, all right, but how fancy will these representations be? Is there a mode I should use? So many of us are very familiar with the idea of like a static visual support, meaning what you see is what you get. I took the picture, I drew the picture, I have the object, and it's there, and it means this, and that's all there is to it. But nowadays, especially with technology becoming more and more, lower barrier to create visual supports or for students, children, individuals to use that technology, you could even use more dynamic visual support. So how come your visual supports don't also have audios? What about the use of videos as a source of video support rather than just static pictures? And then finally, and we'll talk about this a lot in the article on the micro enterprise, how come these visual supports just kind of sit there and maybe they have sounds or the videos and they're things I play and then I consume? Why aren't they interactive? How come I can't use visual supports to change the visuals or add to the visuals that I'm using or use multiple visuals to create a new visual support that's relevant for me, the individual, in the moment or in a certain context, right? So when you think about visual supports, there's so much more than just look at that to-do list. I mean, even a basic to-do list where here are the list of items you need to get for your activity. You can put the order you get them. You can put the location you're going to play with them. You can move them from the to-do to done column. That would be a basic form of interaction. But there's even more than that. And that's kind of why, spoilers, the micro enterprise article I think is so fascinating in terms of just thinking about how advanced visual supports can be.
But it doesn't have to be.
No,
Also.
Right.
It does not
Everything
have to
can be simple, and that's great. Mm-hmm. I like that you wrote, instead of what you see is what you get, you wrote WYSIWYG.
WYSIWYG.
Right,
I
WYSIWYG.
did
It's
not
what I
know
always
that.
say. I always say WYSIWYG,
Are you a computer programmer from the 70s? Which is usually where I see that term.
I did figure out what the acronym was.
Okay.
I did not.
But that cracked me up.
So you've got your different representations, you've got your different modalities. What do you do with these visual supports? Well, kind of some basic categories would be things like make a visual schedule, anticipate what's coming up by putting a list of the activities or the items that are going to be presented next. You could add, when do you start, when do you end, how much time until, you can do a lot more with visual schedules than just sort of putting here are the next couple activities. Usually they're first enter linear order. That's usually how schedules work, right? You could use visual supports to structure the environment. How many of us maybe used pictures to signal to our children when they were growing up where they should put things, so rather than the floor or where I will step on them? Certainly most classrooms have pictures of where materials can be used or school supplies can be used. Where do you drop off your homework? Where do you dry your art projects, right? Where do you put your personal belongings?
We just went to Thanksgiving, and at your aunt's house, she had put up signs everywhere for where everything was. Like there was a dishes cabinet, glasses, where desserts and napkins and everything went. It was very helpful.
Yeah,
she structured the environment.
Well, I told her that I was very excited to use that, for us to use that as an example on our podcast, and she was a bit nonplussed with that statement. Just sort of was like, "Thank you, that's great," and then we continued on. My family loves it when I refer to them as people who will be mentioned on my podcast. Some other examples would be things like visual scripts, which we did a episode about when we talked about social skill training. You can use these for conversation skills, interaction skills. The example of a social story as a visual support. Not that you could just use a social story as the only form of visual support, but as a visual support to the other training you do with social stories. Hey, there you go. You can give instructions how to respond to certain situations. You could use visual supports as reminders of the rules or reminders of the expectations for the context that the individual is in at the time. You could use that sort of to help with maybe a self-monitoring program, or simply to minimize the need for verbal prompts or verbal reprimands, which can be very stigmatizing. You simply point to the rules as a reminder of what the expectations are or what the student could do next. Could be photos of the student
this
performing.
doesn't feel very good to be reprimanded for things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super not
regardless
good.
of what other people think.
Yeah. And then, of course, one of my favorites, the visual task analyses. So things like picture activity schedules or chains of how to complete certain events. Visual support, we mentioned, we keep mentioning these YouTube DIY videos. What a great visual support for step-by-step, how do I complete certain tasks in my home or in my school or out in the yard, right? So those are, I think, very popular ones that probably all of us have direct experience with. So we know all these things we can do with visual supports. The question becomes, are they useful? I think all of us would say, of course they're useful. I use them all the time, which we can't say about a lot of research that we discuss on the show because not all of it are techniques or technologies that we've used directly or had used with us. So this is one where we use them all the time. But there also are a lot of studies looking at, sort of the utility of picture activity schedules, the utility of sort of, the to-do list schedules to use for, queuing in advance of activities. Even recently, we talked about, stereotypy treatment, using a visual support of a reminder of what the expectation was in the environment that the student was in at the time. So again, there are, studies back in the 90s talking about how, they can be, visual supports can be very useful. It can often increase, reliability of how children can perform in certain areas. They're able, like Diana and Jackie talked about at the beginning, to encourage independence because while a visual support can stay forever, adult prompting probably shouldn't stay forever unless it has to. And then my question would be, does it really have to, folks? It can provide structure and predictability, more orderliness to the environment. And again, a lot of autistic individuals, including Temple Grandin, will say that many autistics think in pictures and that visual supports are a much easier way to process information than written or spoken information. Now, again, your mileage is going to vary based on that. I don't mean to say that as like, that's how all autistic individuals think. How, it has been reported by a number of individuals that is the case. I'm sure there are a number that it would not be the case. But that is sort of a common statement that is often heard or is in many books on like working with children or young adults with autism. You can use visual supports at any age. It's not something that can only be seen in preschool, though certainly modality will change, the level of complexity will change. And this article also refers to a publication by Cohen and Sloan in 2007, as well as their own findings to discuss how do you use these visual supports? Because I think this is very important. So there were 6 steps. I added a 7th that was referred to in the article, but I think will make sense when I bring it up, that people should be thinking of when creating visual supports, specifically for young children with ASD in this article. However, I would say this is important for any visual support you would like to use, whether it's for yourself or for your clients. Number 1, ask yourself, what is the purpose of this support? Is this a target behavior I'm trying to teach? Am I trying to support independence and engaging in a behavior? Is it helping with predictions for a student who may have anxiety around changes in schedules? Is this to increase social skill development? You have to know why you're doing a visual support. You can't just slap them on everything. I mean, I guess you can, but it's not necessarily going to lead to a positive outcome for the individual you're hoping to support.
Put a bird on it.
You can't just put a bird on it. No, I'm sorry. You want to make sure you have a visual support that's going to match the target behavior to be learned. So certainly you need to be thinking what visual representation will make the most sense for my client. And that will mean, what are their interests? What are the group contexts that need to be taken into account? We talked about objects may be easier to understand as a visual support, but if you're in high school and you're carrying around all the objects that the student will need throughout their day, that's going to be clearly stigmatizing to the student. So it's probably not the best representation that should be used. Do you have the technology to make things like videos that are interactive, right? So once you've answered these questions, and only once you've answered these questions, would you want to create your visual support. And as you create them, you want to be thinking about things like how durable is this support, right? Everyone's made, I made 1,000 to-do schedules and I used the cheap laminate. And after 3 days of use, they were shredded all to hell and I had to make them again. And then I didn't have time, so I said, I don't want to do this. And we didn't use visual supports anymore in my classroom. Nobody wants to be in that situation. I'm sure we've all been there before where you had to relaminate something or recreate something that got destroyed because the thought is, I'm going to use this visual support every hour on the hour for, all 180 days of the United States school year. And that's a lot of wear and tear. So is it durable? Do you need to move this visual support as well? If it's not portable and you just glued it on the wall, but hey, the kids are going to need it when they go to this center in the preschool or go to a different classroom in the building, you can't take that off anywhere. You're going to have to make another one. Maybe that's for the best. But again, you want to be thinking about the portability of your visual support use. That's why I think videos are great because you can bring those almost anywhere. unless there's no cell reception, in which case you can't bring your videos almost anywhere necessarily. Finally, the super important task is once you've made all these great visual supports, you actually then need to teach the child or the student or your client, whatever terminology is relevant to you, to use the visual support. They have to have it modeled. They need to get feedback in its use. They need practice to manipulate the visual support. They need opportunities and prompting to actually be able to use it with independence and then plan for systematic fading of that prompting, because your visual support's worthless if it just looks nice and nobody ever refers to it. As time goes on, just like with any skill, you must assess and adjust the utility of the visual support. You can make it more mature as the child ages, or add more to the visual support because it wasn't clear enough the first time. Again, you're looking at your data and looking at levels of independence, levels of success, acquisition of the skill that you're hoping to prompt with the visual support. Whatever it is, you're referring to your data to determine whether or not your visual support is doing what you set out for it to do, and making modifications if it is not. And then finally, again, it's mentioned in the article, but I added this in their list if you want to be a stickler on it. Be planning for the generalization and maintenance of the use of this visual support over time. Can this visual support be used in one classroom and used in another? Is this going to be a simple matter? Well, I'll just take that visual support and I'll just stick it in the other room and the visual support will be used independently. As we saw when we looked into picture activity schedules, just taking a picture activity schedule and moving the skeleton of it to a new location doesn't always result in spontaneous generalization of picture activity schedule use. Often there's another training component that needs to go into it. So you need to be thinking about this as you're developing the support, as you're helping the student use and practice with the support. Where is this going over the long term? And how is this going to be? Is this something that makes sense to generalize even? There may be visual supports that aren't relevant to generalize to new settings because they are so specific. So for example, I don't need to generalize my ability to fix sinks because I've only got so many sinks in my house. So once those sinks have been fixed once by watching the video, I'm good. I don't need a new sink video, right? And that is a brief summary of visual support types and how to use them. So we'll take a quick break for listeners, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what this looks like in the research. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we are back talking all about visual supports. But before we do that, I want to remind all of our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. And by listening to the show, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening and then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/getceus, or you can click the Get CEs Here button in the podcast player description of this episode and enter in some information, including 2 secret code words. If you are a patron and you're looking at this video on the Patreon site, well, you still need the code words, but you'll also be able to get them right here and then enter them in because patrons get a CE for this episode at no additional cost. So you're going to listen for the 2 code words and then look in the description on the bottom and you'll get a 3rd code word that gives you a 100% discount on the CE for this episode as our thanks to you for subscribing. If you're someone who says, hey, I want that 3rd code word and I want a discount too, hey, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. It's right there. Subscribe at the $5 and up level and you too can get that code. I swear, it's there on the posting. But everyone's going to need to know this first one. It is ELF, E-L-F. which you might be saying that seems a little out of date if you're listening to this on the free feed because this episode comes out in January, but we are recording it when I was looking at my Christmas tree and our elf on the shelf. So thematic code words will be present. ELF. E-L-F. All right, let's talk about some uses of visual supports. I think, Jackie, you were going to go talking about picture activity schedules for completing a sequence of tasks.
Yeah, so I am talking about the article by Duttlinger and colleagues in 2012, and they were looking at seeing whether a picture activity schedule would help facilitate independence in responding following verbal directives to engage in a task. And like we talked about in previous, in our introduction, their rationale for the study was very much our rationale for using visual supports, right? Mm-hmm. They want to increase student independence. They want to increase student confidence. Everybody uses visual supports, so why not extend the visual supports to everyone, right? And previous research looking at picture activity schedules specifically showed that when students were using picture activity schedules, they saw increase in engagement of the specific task and decrease in teacher prompting, which ultimately you would want, right? And so at the end of the introduction, they make a point that it's really important for clients to be involved in creating the picture activity schedule and using the creation of the picture schedule as a way to start problem solving what their life will be like and giving them more autonomy in creating the schedule. And when I read that, it gave me a false sense of hope in what the article was going to be about, just putting it out there, right? So they said the purpose of the study, they had 2 questions. Again, false hope, number 1. Spoiler. They said, what effects does the picture activity schedule created by the student have on their independent completion of the tasks? That's their first research question. And then, will the creation and use of the picture activity schedule generalize to other settings? Generally. Yeah. So when I read that end paragraph in this first research question, I assumed that they were going to have a whole slew of activities that students needed to do, and that the students would pick the activities that they were going to do in the order that made sense for them to do it in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And so that's what I was like, that is awesome. Right? They are autonomously deciding like what their day is going to look like. And then because they decided what their day is going to what their day will look like, will then they do better on their day.
Right.
That's what I had thought. That is not the case.
Bummer.
Yes.
The article that cites a bunch of Waymeyer articles, right?
Yeah.
And I like those studies because they focus a lot on self-autonomy.
Right.
So I was excited for that reason.
Yep. But no. So
isn't it funny how sometimes I feel like for this one, because when we looked at like Java or about a lot of the topics we covered either on previous episodes or they were very similar to articles we discussed. So we looked a little bit outside at sort of like how visual supports are being used in other environments, in other journals. And it does sometimes seem like, oh, you only read those journals? Well, you missed this line of research, or if you read some of these other ones, maybe you could have gone more with your original question. But they had the question. You're right, Jackie. Like, they had the question, and then...
I don't think they would have found the answer in Java.
No.
No. I don't think... But they kind of just... I don't know. It felt like they missed... Like, for their design, like, they missed some of the pieces that were already in their question that I know I've seen mentioned in some other...
Yeah, and it's okay, right? They still, like, spoiler alert, they got great results, and... They back up their great results with the reasoning why they think they're great results, right? It just wasn't it wasn't where I thought the story was going based on reading the introduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a plot twist.
They weren't the results that it wasn't the narrative sort of I was the same way. I did not expect, I expected a certain narrative and a conclusion, and it was not that.
It was not that.
Left me a little disappointed as a reader, not necessarily as someone getting meaningful services.
Oh, so when I read through the procedures, I had to read them over because I was like, this is not what I thought. Yeah. This is not where I thought we were going, but that's okay. Yeah. They gave me a good rationale. I understand, but future research should really do what I want them to do.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
You're going to publish an article that tells me this is what I'm getting. This is what I'm getting to the fireworks factory. Then you better get to the fireworks factory.
This is what I want. So we'll get there. So what they had is they used 4 participants. They were between 11 and 15 years old. They had a diagnosis of mild or moderate intellectual disabilities. They had average range of hearing and vision. it's important to note that all of the tasks that they had in the picture activity schedule, they already could do independently. So they're not teaching a skill, right? They're teaching the skill to do the picture activity schedule, not the actual task themselves. The goals on their IEP had to emphasize independence, and I was like, shouldn't every single child have that? That shouldn't be like a criteria. That should just be, when I read that, I was like, ugh. Because then some of the participants in their classroom were excluded from the study. They had 3 different participants in their classroom that didn't get to take part in the study because they didn't meet the criteria. I'm like, did they not have an independence goal on their IEP? But anyway, it's okay.
Yeah, you know, school, 20,
it's okay.
20 is a little older article.
I know, but still.
Sometimes, you know, how to write a good IEP objectives, not
I know, but
always
so
there.
that made me pause. They had no prior training using picture activity schedules and parent permission. So these participants were in a sub-separate classroom, but were included for gym and music and a lot of science classes, which is surprising. Yeah. And a lot of the students didn't actually need support in the classroom in the science class, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that looked, but they.
I wanted a little more about what the student's day looked like, not necessarily because you needed it for the article, because I'm always similarly fascinated by, like, you're describing this level of independence that, given some of the other background information I have,
school.
I would expect to be very challenging without a lot of other supports that either exist and you're not describing, or that just for whatever reason these kids love science, or it's a very science experiment based class.
Then you wonder, could they not have been included more?
Right, that's what I'm thinking. Like, if you're included in science, and then the special education teacher in a couple instances of these students didn't even have to help the gen ed teacher.
It's the best science teacher that there ever was.
So I was just like, woo, I'm like, interesting. And I think this also lends us to the generality of this study. Like, who would benefit from this? Right?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's okay. So, they did. The students had a history of using picture symbols throughout their day for, like, hygiene routines, provocational tasks, but not picture activity schedule per se. And so the study was conducted in their self-contained classroom in the middle school. They said that the middle school was in Georgia, and it was located in a middle to high socioeconomic status area. And the generalization phase was conducted in a mall food court. Fun!
Yeah, I did like that.
Right? Okay, so the independent variable here was the picture activity schedule, right? So it looks like a picture activity schedule. They show you a picture. It's like a folder, a binder. You open the binder. There's a list. There's some pictures. There's a to-do side. There's an all-done side, right? That's... So teachers either had 3 to 5 tasks depending on the participant. They randomly told them what they said. So the verbal instructive was, I want you to do task 1, wait for 5 seconds. Then do task 2, wait for 5 seconds. And they wrote this in there specifically. Then do task 3, wait for 5 seconds. Then do task 4, wait for 5. Then do task 5, and then let me know when you're done.
Okay.
So that's the verbal directive. And so here, the students had to match the icon to the verbal directive. Task 1, put it on. Task 2, put it on. Task 3, blah, 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 right? And then let the teacher know when they were all done. So that's kind of the independent variable. The dependent variable was the percentage of tasks completed independently in the order expressed by the teacher. This made me sad.
Right.
So this is where I was like, I don't care.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
They give rationale at the end. Spoiler alert. The rationale is that sometimes at jobs, you have to do things in order. So they were trying to make sure, like, if your manager says, come do all of these things, and there is a specific reason why you have to do them in order, you do them in order. But again, most of the time I don't care. Right?
Yeah.
So I wish that
It depends.
Yes. So I wish that there was a caveat where they're like, oh, they did all 5 tasks.
Yeah.
But they got to choose which one, right? That would promote autonomy to me. That would promote more independence for me than just saying, oh, look, I did exactly what the teacher told me to do in these 5 steps.
And that also feels like the kind of skill, like, if you had to guess, well, I bet if I teach one, they'll just get the other one. Wouldn't you want to start with I bet if you learned how to choose the order of the activities.
Right.
When I said, sorry, I can't have you choose today because reason, please do them in this order, I would assume, unless they really hated that level of control over their schedule, they would be like, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. It's the same skill I've been doing.
I know it's a 2012 article, but coming into it, I thought that was what was going to happen. So just going through, I kind of was soured a little bit.
Yeah.
But they had great IOA. They had great PI. Right? So that's good. Sessions were 10 to 15 minutes, 4 to 5 days a week. They had them during their functional instruction lessons, so it didn't take away from any class time. They only had 23 to 24 lessons per student total. So that's pretty good. They said that the task sequences were not repeated, so that there wasn't like a learning effect. And that no more than 2 tasks could be done outside of the classroom. So some of the tasks that you had were giving a note from the teacher to another teacher in the hall, washing your hands, putting a book on the bookshelf, writing name and date at the top of a notebook paper, getting a tissue, brushing your teeth, using a Clorox wipe to clean the tabletop. So putting on deodorant, like a variety of activities.
And if they were trying to control for not having the same schedule in 2 different teaching sessions, then that would also be why it was predetermined.
Right. Yes. But still. So they used a withdrawal design to examine the effect of using the pitcher activity schedule and not using the pitcher activity schedule. So they had the graph they show everything. They do not let out. So they they show you the generalization setting pre-treatment. They show you what happens if you just told the participant to engage in the task without the pitcher activity schedule. They give you the data on what happens during when they were teaching the pitcher activity schedule, which is pretty fascinating. They just use model. They just modeled it 2 times. Yeah. Right? The teaching assistant was pretending to be the student. The experimenter, the first author, their lead teacher, was being the teacher. They just modeled it twice, and they're like, now go ahead.
Yeah.
And
not the typical procedure that you see for pitcher activity schedule.
Right. And so then after that, they just receive like either a verbal prompt or a model prompt. And that's it. And they just had to get 80% in order to move on. And then the next condition was where they just said, okay, the only support that you're going to have is the pitcher activity schedule. I'm going to give you this verbal direction, either 3 or 5 tasks. Then here's your pitcher activity schedule. Go ahead. Then they reversed that or withdrew it, right? Because they didn't reverse it. They withdrew it because they're taking away the pitcher activity schedule. Now how'd you do without the pitcher activity schedule? They popped the pitcher activity schedule back in. Then they went to the mall. And they had just a general activity schedule at the mall.
Field trip.
Which in 2012 might not have been as empty as it would be if you ran this study again in 2022.
I still love to go to the food court.
I do too. So, looking at these graphs, the graphs are great for all participants. Responding in the generalization condition is at basically very zero.
Very zero.
Very zero. I think 2 participants had 30% accuracy at one point. And then with the no pitcher activity schedule condition, when they're in the classroom, right, doing those general tasks, not very high, like really hovering around 50%, which is probably because you can't remember 5 tasks.
Right.
Right? And they do say in the introduction, which I have not had a chance to go and verify, they said that autistic individuals report that they have really good long-term memory but have bad short-term memory. So
I have heard that anecdotally as well.
Yeah, I have. So I didn't look it up to see if it's accurate now in 2012. But, I mean, I know I wouldn't be able to remember 5 tasks.
Yeah,
putting it out there, right? Once all of the participants met criteria for 80% with the instruction of using the pitcher activity schedule in a very quick way, then they just used the pitcher activity schedule as the only support, and everybody got 100%. It's insane how everybody got 100%.
That's great.
Yeah.
They took the pitcher schedule out, responding dropped.
Well,
everybody added the pitcher schedule back in, 100%, and then generalization was 100% for all participants.
Right. Nice.
Which is amazing.
And it's the great thing about visual supports.
And you never have to take it out.
You don't have to do any additional prompting in this case either. And we didn't even talk about that perspective, right? That this can be a really appropriate, dignified way of helping someone complete a task without having to use a lot of intrusive prompting.
Right. So social validity was good. I wish they would have asked the kids.
Yeah.
Right.
2012,
and they didn't,
maybe they forgot that was something
right.
they could do.
Enter in science, they probably could have asked the kids, right? The authors noted that it was important that the students completed the task in the order which the teacher prescribed due to vocational skills. I now in 2022 would argue, or 2023 would argue, that I don't know if that's necessarily as important, or we should vary it.
Yeah.
Right.
Experimentally, I think they had cause for the way they structured it.
I agree.
But that doesn't mean that they couldn't have also asked this other question.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at with this study. So picture activity schedule like wowed the crowd.
Yeah.
Wowed the crowd.
And it's not that our listeners probably haven't ever used picture schedules before, but I did think this was a nice application given that it was teens too, and they were looking at maybe some different tasks that we don't normally look at for picture schedules.
Right.
In school and
Yeah.
at the mall.
Yeah, in the mall.
All right, Dinah, there are more visual supports. Please describe another article that we read and how visual supports were used.
All right, so I have the Bateman et al. Article looking at visual sports to increase conversation engagement for preschoolers during meal times. And this was a really recent article which was published, and it was kind of an interesting one. I chose it because they were doing something that I've seen done in practice, but I haven't seen a ton of research about, which is how can we add in some basically like visual options in order to try to promote conversation starters, right? And they talked in their introduction in trying to kind of provide justification for the study and the way that they did it. I don't know if they got feedback from the reviewers on their, sort of choice of experimental design / dependent variable. But in their introduction, they were saying like this, it's important that we teach these types of conversations and social skills because, we want to see autistic children included in general education settings as they're least restrictive. However, autistic children often report fewer friendships and higher rates of loneliness. So if developing communication and social skills would help in that regard, then we should set up those types of opportunities. They also said programs that support positive relationships with peers and teachers are tied to improved academic engagement and higher levels of academic achievement. That was like a direct quote from the article right there on that one. But so they, I thought that they were setting up the justification, but I feel that the distance between that justification and then how they actually chose the skills that they were going to teach to produce meaningful social engagement and how they chose to teach them kind of remains in question. So there was kind of a big jump for me between the two.
I did appreciate that this was a population of student that I don't think necessarily gets this kind of format of social skill instruction, given some of the challenges that they had and potentially do they have all the prerequisites for, what we think of as, talking at lunch or having a chat at lunch, right? But in some ways it did sort of end up feeling a little bit like an intervention more for the adults to get them to pay attention to what the kids were supposed to be doing at lunchtime. In which case it was pretty effective there, but maybe not necessarily as much to the original goal of the article.
Right? So what they were saying is what's important is that we teach the kids how to interact during meal times, and we're going to teach them how to respond to one another when they ask questions like, what's your favorite food, or what do you like to do on the playground, right? Like all of those kind of standard questions that you hear. And maybe those are good questions. Maybe the kids are interested in talking about them. We actually have no way to know based on this study if anyone considered these to be appropriate questions, or if development of this particular skill would then do all the things that they said down the road, like increase friendships and decrease loneliness, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, there's like a missing link there potentially. But I did think that the idea of this was cool, right? So they had like little placemats on the table, and it was called Snack Talk. And so they had
Snack Talk.
Snack Talk.
I think I had a dream about this procedure the other day. I was like, what would be on my Snack Talk board?
It could be. And the Snack Talk is like a modified version of Table Talk, which was the original version. But that just made me think, here in New England, they have those Table Talk pies.
Yeah.
Right? They're like little miniature
That's all
pies.
you should be talking
From
about is
Worcester.
what pie you got.
From Worcester.
Oh, they're local to
Yeah,
Worcester.
yeah.
They're local to Worcester.
Oh yeah, and the logo. I think you can still buy them. The logo is like super retro.
You can still buy them.
Little
There's
like
whole
a
table-
personal pan pie.
There's a whole store on Shrewsbury Street.
Okay,
Table Talk pies.
fantastic. Yeah. So first there was Table Talk, then there was Snack Talk, and that was what they were looking at with this study. So a little visual support for being able to ask and answer questions about things that you might find interesting as a preschooler, and they wanted to see if having these present would increase conversation skills, but there's going to be a caveat on the purpose. Before we get to that, there were 5 participants in the study. All of the children were diagnosed on the spectrum. They were aged between 3 and 4, and all were emerging or pre-emerging speakers. So they generally spoke in either 1 to 2 word vocal phrases, or they used pointing as their main form of communication. So there was Corey, Marie, Jonathan, Claire, and Justin. And I will also note that Justin predominantly spoke Spanish at home, and they did honor any Spanish words that he used. And then there was a confusing thing about peers for generalization, which I'll just bring up in a minute. The setting was in a preschool classroom, but it was a sub-separate classroom that only had children with a diagnosis who were receiving this specialized education in it. And the materials were these snack talk cards that I talked about. They were 8 by 11 laminated sheets of paper. And they had a written question on it, such as, what is your favorite snack? And then they had 9 to 12 visuals of possible answers.
I like that.
What if your choice wasn't on there? That did not, that possibility was not addressed in the study, but I guess they picked the top 9 to 12 things that kids usually like. I feel like I bet goldfish was on there, right?
Joe, goldfish is always on there, right?
Right.
Candy, maybe?
Well, it's supposed to be like at snack time.
Oh.
I don't know. I didn't know. And
Candy can be a snack.
it can be. Another thing that is a little bit sad for me is that they didn't get a visual of the snack talk board in the study.
They should have done it. Yeah.
They had 22 pages. You think they could have fit that in there?
But it's like a study on visual support. So I was expecting it, and I was like, every page I was like, it's going to be on the next page.
No.
It's going to be on the next page, and then it was the references.
They had pretty big margins. They could have maybe just...
So I don't know. I mean, that's not in their control, but that was a teensy bit sad for me. Dependent variable was this social conversation engagement. It was measured via partial interval recording, 10-second intervals during the first 10 minutes of lunch. And it was defined as, quote, any verbal or nonverbal social communicative act with another individual, peer, or teacher that also included a bid for attention. Manding for meal-related stuff was not included. And like I said, it didn't have to be verbal. It could also be a nonverbal communicative act, which included pointing to one of the choices on the mat. Now, they didn't take data on whether the participants were initiating or following a conversation. That's partially why they did the partial interval, because that stuff gets confusing.
Yeah, it
all right?
does.
So that's fair. But also, they didn't take data on whether the social and conversation engagement was prompted or unprompted.
Oh, no. Why? Did they put that in their limitations?
Yeah.
Oh, that's unfortunate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw that, and I saw that when I was reading it, and I was like, what happened? And how did you continue with the publication process? Right?
I don't know.
But that's okay. I'd like to hear. Like, maybe they're like, this is investigatory, right? But yeah, shocking.
It was a withdrawal design.
Okay.
Also interesting, Jackie, I did note that both of our studies properly identified they used a withdrawal design
Yes,
and not a reversal. So
right?
that was kind of nice to see. So they had a baseline test model. They planned for 5 data points in each condition, but sometimes the participants were out. So they had fewer than 5 data points. They really beat themselves up over this.
It was
the authors.
It was like a long section.
Yeah, they should have just beat themselves up over the independence and prompted, not this part.
I know. I was like, guys, kids are out sick. That's totally understandable. So, but again, maybe that was a reviewer 2 thing. Okay, baseline, it was lunch. There were 5 kids. There were 4 support teachers. No snack talk supports were present. Instead, the teachers interacted as usual, meaning they did not provide any conversation prompts, but they sporadically asked the children to eat lunch. So that was like business as usual. But please note that in the intervention, they're going to be prompting them to ask and answer questions. All right? Mm-hmm. So that is different between baseline and intervention. In the intervention, now we have the snack talk cards are on the table, right? So that's our visual support. The teachers model asking and answering a question using the card. They then wait to see if anyone starts to engage in conversation. If they don't, the teacher then goes around and asks each child to answer the question with the card. That was modeled for beginning of every session. And then the cards were on the table, and the teachers used least to most prompting during conversation lulls, which were defined as 10 to 15 seconds, to have the participants discuss the topics with each other. So then the teachers would prompt as much as is needed to have the participants ask one another these questions anytime there was a silence in the conversation. All right, and so they went back and forth and did that. The generalization condition, I read this part a few times, and I honestly am not sure what happened here. They wanted to look at how the participants did with different peers, but they couldn't report the data because they didn't have the peer consent, I think. But then there are data for it, so I'm not sure if they just couldn't video record it or they couldn't be there in person. But we have the data to look at, and I think that they're the data from the peers, or else they're just the data with the same participants, but now it's called generalization. I honestly am not sure. It was confusing, so I'm sorry that I can't accurately report what happened there.
I read it, I took it as now they're talking and using the snack talk with other peers, but they seemed very fixated on a few components of their study that seemed a bit less relevant than some of the other ones that maybe they should have been looking at.
Yep. They did PI, that was good. IOA, that was good. Social validity, the teachers liked the intervention. That's all we know regarding that. Results, they included some effect size data. So they have those. And then for our participants, some of them saw an increase during intervention in their social conversation engagement. For Corey, there was somewhat of an increase from like 0 to 10% in baseline to 20% in intervention of intervals. For Marie, she averaged like 15 to 20% in baseline and then 20 to 30% in intervention. So on the graph, it really doesn't look like a very clear visual change. Jonathan was at 0% in baseline and like 10 to 20 in intervention. Claire really only saw an increase from the 0 to 10% when she got to the generalization condition. That one increased 20%. And then Justin was the one who was out sick a good bit, so he only had 2 days of points in each of the baseline sessions, but those were at 0%. And he had an increase in intervention to 10 and then up to 20 in the second intervention. All right, so they're not huge gains. It does help when you look at it via the effect size change, right? Because, those look like much bigger jumps, but visually it's a little bit unclear if this made a big difference. But also please note that these data are potential overestimates for one thing because they're partial interval data. Mm-hmm. It is a short interval, but that should be noted. Secondly, we don't have any information on whether these responses were prompted or not. And given that in the baseline conditions, they didn't have access to the visual supports without prompts, we have multiple pieces of the independent variable being accessed here only during the independent variable, which makes it really difficult for us to suss out which of these, if we want to say that we saw a demonstrable change, which of these pieces was actually important. Was it that they were getting a model? Was it that they were getting a prompt? Was it then were they getting a question prompt? Was it they were getting least to most prompting? Or was it that they had the visual supports present? Mm-hmm. We don't know. Mm-hmm. We don't know. So I think that this is a really interesting idea of having these visual supports out and available to folks, but you would need to go about asking the question a different way if you wanted to determine if the reason why you saw a potential change in behavior was due to the visual support of the placemat itself.
Right.
So I don't think it's a bad idea, but I can't tell you as of this moment in time if it's effective.
Well, thanks, Diana.
Oh, you're a bet.
And that brings
I'll
us...
be right back.
Okay.
Your bet.
Diana will be right back. But I'll continue on because I'll be talking about our last article on the visual supports to create a micro enterprise in a school by Fields and Demchak. This is from 2019. And I think the theme for all 4 of the articles we discussed is odd, either no research design or odd choices of research question or design or procedure. And this one is no exception in that it is not exactly a structured research article the way you would think of one. It's more like a case study. But in reading it, it was hard not to want to include it because it felt like such a novel use of visual support. It's like just an extension of everything that we talked about in previous episodes, in which visual supports have been a component. In the other articles we were looking at to kind of prepare to have a bigger discussion about just visual supports, in total. So I did want to bring it up briefly. Now, again, it's not going to be necessarily a study in that they don't have any graphs. They don't have any data to support anything they're saying. However, when you hear about it, I hope everyone says, that sounds like the most fascinating set of visual support usage. I kind of want to see the more detailed, nitty-gritty study with more than just sort of the say-so of the authors. But it was just so cool. So the key component here was, how do we use visual supports in a secondary school? Because one of the challenges with working with individuals with disabilities is that at some point, those individuals will need to find jobs and be out in the larger world outside of school. So how do we do meaningful vocational training? It's a requirement in the United States, at least, in schools to do vocational training. As students get older, they have to have that be a component of either their course of study, or potentially they have individualized education plan goals around vocational or transition services and how they'll reach independence. And so there's been a real increase in the utility of, say, like job coaches and looking out in the community for sites for students to do this work at. However, depending on where you are in any country, there are going to be limits logistically to how many students can leave the school to go to a job site. There are only so many job sites. There are only so many buses. It costs a lot of money to fund all of this work. So what if we made a job site? And not like a pretend job site where kids just practice doing a couple skills, but an actual job site in the school itself. And this is where this study came from, was what if we created a coffee shop in our school, and using that coffee shop, we created, and not just like I know here in our town, we have a lot of vocational training. There are a lot of students who do like coffee delivery and do coffee cart type work. So that an awesome start. This is like next level. Like, it's like, what if we made a Starbucks here at the high school using visual supports and run by our students? Is kind of what it came down to some extent. Now maybe I'm overblowing it but they did have pictures in this article, and like the one you were discussing, Tyler.
They had a lot of pictures.
So
no data.
They had no data, but they had pictures. So we got to stick these articles together. We'd have data and pictures, and then you've got yourself a research paper right there, folks. So,
and experimental control, that'd be it.
Yeah, they both need experimental control. So again, there were a lot of holes in some of the research we discussed this week. So what about using an online enterprise as a vocational training site? Now, again, I think they oversold the online enterprise component of this, but there was a website in which people put in orders. There was data that had to be pulled from that website by students. So in that way, it is a kind of a nice look at online enterprise, because there are a lot of students who might do really well with vocational tasks that are online. And are we looking at those as much as we need to be? But in any case, this research was based on another study by Carson, Gass, and Ayers from 2008, which used visual activity schedules that were in a photo album to teach students with disabilities how to complete vocational tasks at a Walmart. They didn't share a lot of data in discussing that article, but it did seem like the students learned to complete the task with more efficiency. And, very important, the managers at the Walmart actually really liked the schedules and, quote, called it an easy strategy to implement, end quote, which, as we've learned in many studies where we say, here's some awesome research, at the end of the day, if the places you want to use that research, everyone says, no, I hate that and I won't use it, kind of doesn't matter how good the intervention is. So this is the creation of the extension of that research to create the cafe. Quote, an online school-based micro-enterprise at a rural high school, end quote. So we had the teachers start this process off. They created a simple homepage for the business where people could put in orders, make comments, make special offers, and then they would take those orders, and then the students could view them and then, create the coffee orders and then deliver the coffee orders in school. They used Photoshop, they used Office Suite software to do all of this work. And basically, all you get about the procedure is the idea that they trained the students to use these supports with basic prompting methods and then systematically faded the teacher instruction so that the students could fully run the business. And they say this process took about 2 years total from the beginning to the end. But by the end, the business was completely run by the students. And the students were actually telling their other staff members and their peers how to use the visual supports. Not necessarily training them to use them, but using them, referring to the visual supports as look here and it will tell you what to do. So they had visuals for the task initiation. They had schedules of the classrooms. They had time cards. You get the orders on an iPad. You had the standing order board, job duty schedule, all that good stuff. They had visual work TAs. So if you're taking the order, if you're choosing to do delivery, if you're doing inventory, if you're using the cash register, if you're putting away your uniform. They even had a profit loss spreadsheet TA, which I could use. So I hope the authors will send that my way. So they had all of that. They had visual reminders. They had a script for customer service interaction. They even had a script for how to get people to buy more prepaid cards. They had an employee of the week display, which we'll talk about why that wasn't the worst idea, because we have talked about how much we don't like employee of the whatever awards very much on this podcast. They had a safe work count display. They had safety rules, which sounded to me just like the OSHA poster. So I don't know if that counts. I never really thought of that OSHA poster in your school break room as a visual support, but I guess it is in a way.
Yeah.
They had menus, which of course, a visual support, visual reminder there. They had a visual for the job duty schedule, what needed to be done. So again, all of these great visual supports kind of hitting almost all the modalities and representation types that we talked about in the intro. So you would teach the baristas to identify what their duty was by looking at the job board. They had, job and cleanup type duties. They had taking orders, making orders. You ran the bagel counter, you ran the coffee counter, you ran the cash register, you did inventory, you had to clean all the materials, you had to go take the deliveries, right? And at every station, like we said in the intro, they had the relevant visual supports to complete that task. The visual tabulation sheet, everything was laminated. So these are interactive boards too, in that they had everything laminated. They had dry erase boards. They had various visuals, so like pictures of the teacher. So once you saw the teacher's name for the order, you take that, put it on the order form. They had these like punch cards that they would use for the teachers. So those are the kind of interactive type visual supports. That's like next level interaction where
Sure
you got to use all the
excited.
supports. It was so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. The visual activity schedules for like how to make coffee, how to make bagels, those are pretty basic, just sort of step-by-step instructions, pictures, simple pictures with words next to them. Those are actually a little less fancy than some of the other systems that they had there. Again, the authors noted that while they were training these, they actually noted that sometimes the staff would even fade from using the visual supports after they'd done the job long enough, which was great. No data about that, but anecdotally, the visual supports might not have been needed for all of the students all of the time. They had, different variations in some of the scripts based on whether it was a delivery at the counter or delivery in the classroom. They had an upsell kind of visual support of like, hey, I noticed your coffee count card is getting low. Perhaps you'd like to buy another one. These were all, they were color-coded. The buttons on the cash register were color-coded. So again, lots of markers to help track things like deliveries, to track the inventory. They did, again, we kind of mentioned that they posted health and safety rules. They did set up some incentive systems for safe and sanitary work. They had Employee of the Week award, which I think they oversold. Like, because you get to put your photo up and there's an incentive item you earn, that was a useful visual support for getting people to do work. Whereas I might argue, if you had an incentive that you reliably gave to people for completing tasks, that would probably have been the reason that some individuals would engage in those tasks more often.
Right.
Like a reinforcer?
Yeah, like a reinforcer.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons we hate employee of the whatever, because usually it's like vague statement of maybe an award, and then somebody gets an award and no data on, this was very much an incentive system that happened to have a visual support behind it. I would say that probably did even less with the number of days. Like, they didn't mention they had a safe day work count. So they track days without lost time to an accident, and if they reach 60 days, everyone would get a pizza lunch. But they didn't say anything like, did this start at 60 days and was like, I want to see no spills or anything for 60 days, and then you get a pizza lunch? Or was it lower and then they shaped it up over time? Was there a baseline rate? Did they ever earn this pizza lunch that they had a visual about? So they didn't answer every question that I certainly had about the utility of some of these supports. So again, we have all these great visual supports, and anecdotally, they seem to have helped allow these students with disabilities run a coffee shop. However, they don't really talk about which ones worked the best, which ones were needed, which ones needed some training, and then were able to fade easily, which ones weren't, which ones just sort of were arbitrary and just existed because we have visual supports in a workspace that don't do anything, in any job. So, hey, maybe there's more of the same. So an example of what an order would look like. You get an order coming in through the website, right? You take your visual order taker and your order tabulation sheet on a clipboard near the computer. You'd go to the staff ID board, get the picture of who you were getting the order for, put it on there so you'd remember who the order was for. Then the shift manager would sort of read it and then signal to the person at the bagel station what the bagel order was. Then you would go make the coffee. You'd go to your station. The steps were there of how to get that bagel order ready, how to get the coffee order ready. Once it's done, you'd have a different staff, or sometimes the same staff, I think. I couldn't quite read the whole job flowchart, who would go deliver it. They'd have a script to tell the teacher, here's your coffee, thank you for ordering it. A nice short and sweet script, I really liked it. Maybe remind them of the need to purchase another card. Then you'd come back, mark the sale off on the board, move on to the next assignment for whatever station you were working for. So again, these very interactive, very elaborate visual supports. But within 2 years, you have a cafe that's run solely by students with disability. So what's missing in terms of actual data and replicability? Certainly there's a lot. But the idea that you
Data.
Data. But the idea that you could use these visual supports and at least anecdotally create something like this, very, very fascinating idea. So I do hope that we see more replications of studies like this and just really going whole hog on the visual supports and let us know even more how this could be created in more environments for different types of jobs. And then could this generalize to real job sites? I mean, this is a real job site. I don't want to discount the work
Were
here.
the workers compensated?
No, I think they were students who, I think it was part of their vocational training program. So they did not make any money. I'm assuming that the money went back to the school somehow.
That would be kind of nice.
Yeah, it would
Yeah.
be nice too.
Yeah.
Just if they're working there a lot, they should probably get paid.
Well, they're working there as part of their school day. So
Yeah,
I would assume that the
still,
money
though.
went into like some sort of like, student activity fund for the building as a whole or something like that, rather than the students getting
I guess
paid.
we just don't know, but
Yeah.
it would be kind of nice to know that because their time is still valuable.
Yeah. So aspirational visual
Yes.
supports.
I liked this one because it just included so many examples
Mm-hmm.
of how you might incorporate visual supports. And again, it's for an older population. You're looking at vocational tasks, which we don't always see. And it did include nice visuals to look at. And you're like, oh, that's how you could set that up. It was like really nicely laid out and some like simple line drawings, etc. So it was like a neat example article if you're thinking about incorporating this for your clients.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now what they could do is take this, because it's very technological,
Yeah.
and actually get data.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of the show. And if you are watching our video, patrons, here's a video model for you. How do you make the ABA Inside Track Dissemination Station soundtrack? Here it is. There. That's how you do it. If you're just listening on the free feed, you're just going to have to imagine.
Wow, there it was.
We did not give you a visual support. We only give you auditory supports. So, I mean, this is a tricky one because I don't think any of us read these articles and were like, well, I was down on visual supports, but now I agree that they're very useful. Also because some of the articles, while I think they were exciting extensions and locations and a utility of visual supports, none of them, I think, passed all of what we want to see in the perfect sort of, and now I know all there is to know about X test. So, I mean, I guess it's going to be more of our own thoughts on visual supports, what we thought of some of these extensions, and some ideas we have for future extensions. So, Jackie, Diana, what do you think? Visual supports. What are some next steps that you were inspired by?
I want to do the study.
Yeah.
I want to take the study that I thought they were doing and do it.
Yeah.
Is give them all the work tasks they have for the day, have them set up their own schedule, problem solve what's going to be the best, and see whether they still engage in the task without teacher supports.
There you go.
Bam. That's what I want.
Nice and easy.
Nice. I think something that you said early on in this episode, Rob, is really important, which is if you provide...
Wait, something I said?
Yeah,
Whoa.
I know. You provide supports to the whole class, then you don't need to single out your student as the one who needs additional supports. Everyone can benefit from visual support. So I would be interested to take a look at adding in additional supports into a general education classroom, like what the schedule is and what what you've decided the class rules are, or whatever, who knows, whatever it could be, right? getting your materials together to go home and having like a to-do list of that, anything like that. And then looking at not just what the prompts are that are needed for your client, but across the classroom, what changes does this make? I think that would be really interesting and would help support what I think we all agree on, which is visual supports are an easy, inexpensive, dignified way to promote independence, not require a lot of overt physical prompting and interaction when it's not necessary, and not require removal of prompts for across the board.
Yeah. I kind of want to piggyback on yours, Diana, because I'm in a lot of classrooms and I see a lot of visual supports, and I'm sort of working on a project now where I'm trying to sort of look at baseline classroom conditions, and myself and a colleague were sort of looking at, what other things? Do they have classroom management systems? Do they have visual supports? Is there a schedule? And while we were doing our pilot, we thought, you know what, we need to not just put, do these exist, but we have to put, are these ever referenced by anyone? And I'm not in, the same classroom like every day of the year. So perhaps they were multiple times and students are now independently completing the task. But I would also be curious to look at what are the prompts that go into teaching the use of visual supports. Are they robust enough to get all students performing independently? Because I've been told many times like, it's been all year and the students still can't do X, Y, Z. To which I say, then I don't think you've taught the student how to do X, Y, Z. It's not the student's problem, because there are lots of technologies you could be kind of leaning on to help with that task. And I'd be curious to see how many visual supports actually ever get taught, or how many students just sort of learn from modeling from their peers, which is a great visual support in its own way to some extent, but is not necessarily going to be the way that all of us or all individuals can learn a skill. So I'd like to look a little more closely at that. I also would like to similarly say, just sort of think about what are some other really complicated tasks, and how could we put together these elaborate visual supports, much like the cafe, to sort of create some sort of, not necessarily vocational job, but whether it's in play or center-based learning activities, how could we sort of put these things together to sort of make something robust that allows for, now I don't have to follow the child around and tell them, now do this, now do that. And I know picture activity schedules, I love those. Those are a great way to do it. But how do we keep adding more interactivity in our picture activity schedules? And there's a lot of good research out there. We've done episodes on it before, but just always pushing that envelope of how we can use technology and visual supports. Hey, why not have a bank of video visual supports of how to do things, and give students novel problems where they can go to their bank of visual supports, watch the video, and then try it themselves. Some students might really appreciate that level of autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's how most of us function these days when we're faced with problems, right? All right, well, visual supports, big thumbs up from the ABA Inside Track crew. But we also say, if you're doing research articles on visual supports, please make sure to write down and then answer your research question, present data, and make sure you answer all your questions get your consents in so you can share all of the relevant data to inquiring minds like ours. Just saying. Well, we appreciate everyone out there listening to ABA Inside Track. We'd appreciate if you rate, review, and subscribe.
Give us a 5-star review.
Give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you like to get your podcasts. Certainly, if you want to find us, we're on all the socials as ABA Inside Track. You can email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. Go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles discussed on this episode, as well as our back catalog, and to purchase CEs for the vast majority of our episodes. If you are saying, I wish I could have seen this episode being recorded, or I wish I'd gotten to say what article I wanted to hear about, because I do want to hear about direct instruction, Rob. I really, really do. Well, you can always join us on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for just $5 a month, you can get these episodes a week ahead of time, get access to all of our polls, including our book club polls, as well as one free CE for watching these videos or listening to the episode and then, going to the video link. You don't have to watch us if you don't want to, but that would be how you get that code. And if you want even more, subscribing at the $10 premium level, you'll be able to get access to our extra long book club podcast. We're coming up on our newest one, Between Now and Dreams, by Eli Rosales and Henkel Wolf. I have the book over here, by the way. I'm just going to show everyone. Ooh, There it is. That we'll be recording very soon, as well as to get 2 CEs for listening to our book clubs and all of our previous book clubs and live episodes. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. For everyone out there, if you do want to get CEs for this episode, I'll give you the second secret code word now. It is SLIDER. SLIDER. Perhaps it's referring to a child or person who loves to go down slides. But I was thinking about my brand new Christmas ornament. Why, it's KK Slider from Animal Crossing. He's on my sweatshirt right now.
I thought you were talking about Mini Hamburger.
Me too.
No, I was not. I was talking about a character from the Animal Crossing video game. I got him as a Christmas ornament, and my son likes to play him because you press a button. I didn't even know this when I bought him, and he sings the Animal Crossing song. It's very adorable. So, Slider. And of course, if you are a Patreon supporter already, we thank you very, very much. If you were here in the live episode, we will get your information once we're done recording. And if you are watching this after the fact, just check the notes at the bottom of that post to get the code for a discount, 100% off on your CE. If you purchase a CE for this episode, you'll get it at no additional charge. It's a big thank you to you from us for supporting us there. And that's everything. Thanks also to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. It won't be recorded live like this one is, but you'll see it in your feed just like normal as we enjoy this new 2023. That'll be next week. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.
Say bye, Jaggy. Bye.